Hey everyone, Depressed Eeyore here with Madara on Tabletop Simulator. Madara is a uh, board game tactical RPG with, I guess, a linear narrative story type thing. It has some branching paths, but I haven't experienced the game enough to actually say how branching things are. But for the most part, if you're someone that enjoys like the standard RPGs, like your Final Fantasies and things like that from old school, that just kind of have set characters that kind of change throughout the story, and you kind of just follow the plot points and stuff. This game, it could be up your alley, especially if you're someone that's like you like games like Dungeons and Dragons and Pathfinder, but you don't really want to deal with all the extra stuff. Maybe you just really want to focus on the tactical combat and stuff. This game has tactical combat, it's grid-based movement, and it has already a pre-baked story for the most part. There are some decisions you can make, though I believe majority of them are done throughout the actual encounters themselves. There are two ways you can play this game. There is crawl mode, and then there is kind of the main story mode. The main story mode kind of plays, like I mentioned before, very much like an RPG. That's where you kind of have to play through multiple sessions, gradually progressing through the chapters until you finish the act. Their first Kickstarter brought out the Middara Act 1, as well as a few crawl modes. The other game mode, of course, being crawl mode. Their recent Kickstarter did updates to the rules, essentially a 1.5 update. And they're also going to be working on getting Act 2 and Act 3 completed. This module is completely kind of okayed by the creators of the game over at Succubus Publishing, which is awesome because I've been really eager to play this game, and unfortunately I don't have a physical copy yet. But now that there's this tabletop simulator version, I can actually show off the game. I have gotten started on working on some Roll20 stuff, but this module on Tabletop Simulator is actually rather good. So I may end up just sticking with this. There have been a lot of people that have been helping out on making this module, or actually just a few people really. They've been actually including things like scripting that make setting up and cleaning up the board a lot easier, all sorts of stuff. As for the game itself, like I mentioned before, it's very much like a tactical RPG. You can gain experience, and there's not really levels in this game. Instead, you kind of just have abilities you can buy with experience points, and you can kind of mix and match your stuff as you need, as you like, essentially. And then there's your gear as well, which can set up. You can have a wide variety of builds. I've only played through Chapter 1 of Act 1. And I got to the very beginning of Chapter 2. I have attempted to record this prior to getting that point, but I was kind of a little too inexperienced, and I felt like it wasn't really the best quality, so I scrapped it. But now that I've kind of got a few multiple encounters under my belt, and I've gotten through the rules somewhat, I feel pretty comfortable with like showing this game off. Now, assuming nothing breaks, which I mean, this module is an alpha build, so bugs do happen with occasional updates and things like that. So just be aware. The good news is, for the most part, even if the scripting breaks, I kind of know where everything's at, and I can kind of set in beyond the mast. There's not really any scripting to set up stuff automatically. You kind of have to do it by hand. So it is at that point so far. Anyway, the other play mode I briefly mentioned was crawl mode, which is kind of more designed as like a one session thing, where essentially it's just a few encounters latched together. It tends to be the crawl modes tend to be kind of the side quests that are in the main story. I mean, at least the first one was. I don't know about the other ones. You can also play crawl mode in the way where you carry over into the next crawl mode until you get through all of them. I think there's like 5 different tiers of crawl mode or something like that. And it's essentially just played for mostly just purely for tactical gameplay, not too much of the story. Anyway, I think I've rambled on enough. This game does have a lot of narrative and story if you are playing through the story mode, which I will be playing through a good chunk of the story mode. I don't know how far I'll go. And I will probably read the narrative out loud. I might put it as a separate video. I haven't really decided yet. We'll figure it out as we go along. So as far as the module itself, just some things to kind of point out. Up here you have your hidden cards. Hidden cards are kind of the only thing that are kind of, I guess, a kind of a legacy part of the game, where as you progress, you'll unlock them. This can include things like creatures, bosses, items, disciplines, even characters. And if you unlock those characters, you can kind of use them in crawl mode. Of course, you can open this thing anytime you want if you really want to. You're fine with being spoiled. There's some alternate player variants here if you're playing with less characters. By the way, generally a party is 4 people. So this game is generally designed to be 4 players. You can do 5 players where 1 person controls the monsters only. Also, if you play with less people, you can do either the variant mode or you can just be someone that controls multiple characters. I recommend generally controlling multiple characters. It's not that difficult. I've been playing by myself, controlling 4 characters, and it went well enough. Other things of note, over here we have items. Right now they only have mundane and common. There are multiple tiers of items. There's mundane, common, uncommon, and then rare. And essentially you kind of get more, you get to the higher tiers through progression usually. There's also combatant loot cards, which are just, let me look at this. Okay. Yeah, so, and this is just the loot deck, which they already have the mundane one set up for you. Essentially, it's just filled with a bunch of gold and equipment and other drops as well. As we're killing monsters, we'll be drawing those. And then there's monster loot here, which is like if you get specific parts from a monster, you'll draw from here. Up here, like I mentioned, you have disciplines. Up here, we have item upgrades. Some of these things you probably don't know what they mean. That's completely okay. I'm just kind of pointing out where stuff is at. If you ever get access to Exalted Espers, they are here in this little pile here. If you get access to Familiars, you have them here. Over here, we have tons of tokens, effects. What's it called? Effects. I don't remember the other one term. Statuses, things like that. You also have all these are infinite, so you can just draw out as many as you need. There are all the dice if you need them. We have health counters here. Some plank counters, some immunity paralyzed. Oh, I was looking for that. Some used exhausted tags if you need them. And then up here is the trash bag. Sometimes when you're clearing the board, if the script doesn't know what to do with an item, they'll throw it in here. So gradually as we're playing, we're probably going to end up filling it with mostly dice. And like I mentioned before, here's the loot deck, which is just going to be probably strewn out here as we're playing. Here is the initiative track, which will fill out as we play. And then here we have stuff that's for setting up encounters. We have things like setting up the north, south, east, west compass marker. We got the totems. We have the objectives. We have loot tokens, exits tokens, tiles, which are very much like dungeon tiles. You can see there. We got the figures, intelligent monster cards, command cards, which are very similar. And then we have initiative cards for pretty much everybody, which is what is put up here. Over here we have the party stash. Anything that's not in someone's inventory will end up in the party stash eventually. And you can't really access it except at certain points. Over here we have all the audio narratives. I mentioned this game has a lot of narrative stuff. So if you just don't want to deal with reading, you can load this up and just play it and have someone else voice act it for you. I find, the last time I attempted to use this on Tabletop Simulator, I found it to be very, very faint, or very, very quiet for some reason. I don't know why. I had the volume set to max, but it was very quiet. What I did is I actually went to succubuspublishing.com and I just downloaded all of the audio narratives. One thing I noticed about the audio narratives is they don't completely match with the dialogue here, probably because of the 1.5 update. Also, sometimes it just cuts off at the very, very end for some reason. I noticed that towards the end with like Chapter 2 and the end of Chapter 1. Over here we have the Revealer, which we'll know more about as we go along. Here we have the Adventure Book. It has Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. We're right now going to do Chapter 1. There's a pop out to screen if you want to see things a little bit easier. We have Load Page, which will, if the scripting's set up for it, it will automatically set up the board in the best way possible. Clear, which will just clear out everything off the board. You'll either return it to its respective locations or put it in the trash bag. And then we'll do that last. Over here, we have pretty much all the other possible books you might be messing with. We got the rule book. I'm not going to be using this. I have I got my own stuff set up here. And over, but we also have things like diagrams. Sometimes the encounter will tell you to set up something based off a diagram. So you go to the diagram book here. We have the adventure sheet as well, which is probably what we're going to have open most of the time, because it is where we keep track of gold, experience, damage, etc. At any point, if you need to like save your save your progress, you can just set what page you're at and what your current statuses are, etc., etc. As you get characters, they'll be listed here, and you'll be setting them as uninjured or unselectable depending on the story. Of course, we got the flags, which are triggered based off accomplishing certain things that may or may not influence the narrative. Achievements, which are kind of similar to flags, but don't really seem to affect the narrative, at least from my experience. It's just kind of like a challenge thing that you can do, and if you succeed, you just get to note it. It tends to also include an actual reward, which are pretty good. And then here's how we keep track of item upgrades if you've unlocked any. More on that later. And down here we have notes, which we'll be using from time to time. There's some developer video stuff. There's actually a YouTube video that kind of shows off kind of the initial setup for this. Like I mentioned before, it's an alpha, so stuff may or may not change. We got some variant rules. I don't think I've ever looked at the variant rules here. It's a little weird. Okay, yeah, let's just talk about adventure area. It seems to be a little bugged, so I'm not going to worry about that. As I mentioned before about the narrative being long, if you just don't want to deal with listening to anyone read the narrative or don't want to read it yourself, there's Spark Notes for pretty much everything. So instead of going through multiple pages, you can just kind of read the bullet points here, which kind of go over stuff. Anything that's in red will talk about stuff that you need to do as players. So for example, here it's talking about all about the setting up the mast. And then down here at the bottom it says take a starting pack, which is the stuff here where you're taking your starting gear type situation. And then like down here you have things like, oh, you need to do a skill check here, you need to, award some loot, etc. I intend on reading the narrative. As always, I'll try, if possible, I'll try to include timestamps, or I'll set it as a separate video. We'll see how it goes. Anyway, I'm going to switch it back to Adventure Sheet for now. Over here, yeah, this is the HP bar writer. This is something that they've been experimenting with some stuff. I haven't bothered with any of it. I personally just use the HP counters. They've been messing with some other ways that are hopefully a little bit better, but as far as just functionality, it does what it needs to do. So down here we have the characters. It's by default, it's going to set up the initial 4 characters that are unlocked and part of the main narrative of the story. And it has set up mats for them. They have the character card set up. It automatically has your starting gear set up based off the mast at the beginning. Obviously, if you do anything like crawl mode or... well, pretty much if you're just doing crawl mode or something like that, you would end up just putting these back where they're supposed to be, and then just kind of going through and, setting up your own starting stuff. In crawl mode, you actually just get starting experience and starting gold, and then you have access to a shop that you can just buy what you need and set up your disciplines. Each of the characters have their own little character card. It goes through the various standard actions, standard abilities that you have access to while you're playing. And then the opposite side, it has the Adventurer's Turn, which just is divided up by the start of turn, status, refresh, action, and then end of turn phase, which we'll go over more as we go along. Like I mentioned before, the mat is kind of set up pretty simply. It has 2 weapon slots, a core slot, an armor slot. For the weapon slots, it's 1 for each hand, but if you have a 2-handed weapon, you'll only be able to use 1 of them, which is, in this case, this is a 2-handed weapon. You got a weapon slot here. Got discipline slots all along the bottom. There's also a familiar slot and a companion slot. The companion slot is if you're playing, I think, a variant. Familiar is if you, of course, got the familiar discipline. You got 3 relic slots, which this is not a relic. Accessory slot. And then here you have 3 consumable slots, 3 pack slots. Essentially, the pack is kind of your backpack, where you just don't have ready access to an item. And then consumables is essentially you can use it immediately because you have access to it. For simplicity's sake, anything that's in my consumable slots are going to be here, just to show that they're available. And then anything that's in the pack will be in the pack slot. And then I'll just leave this blank. Something to note, of course, is there is snapping. As you can see, when I'm like clicking and dragging it, it'll snap to essentially a grid. It's a little annoying with cards, but for dealing with the actual grid-based movement in combat, it's pretty useful. One other thing to note is there's the stamina points here. You just keep track of the red thing. So if you ever like, I'm taking a move action and then I'm going to attack, you just, spend your stamina like that. Health counter here, increase it, decrease it. The way Madara does HP is you have a health total, or you have a health stat, and then you take damage here. So once this damage meets or exceeds the total health that you have, that's how you get defeated. So it's not like HP where it goes down, it's actually damage that goes up. Nothing else of note. Each of the characters do come with a little used, and infinite exhausted if they need it. So for example, if I use Nightingale's ability here, I would mark it as a used and just put it there to note that, hey, I used this ambitious ability and so forth. Alright. And that is, I think, about it. Just for the simplicity of the starting stuff, Rook does start with a few heal tokens. That's just because he starts with the Min ability. And I think that's everything. So real quick, I'm just going to set these up here, like I mentioned before, just to show that this is where I'm going to keep the active ones. Alright. And yeah, we'll just do something like that. That's fine. Alright. And at that point, I'm going to go ahead and go through the dialogue. If you're not interested in any of the actual narrative type stuff, by all means, you probably will end up skipping to the next video. But real quick, we'll just go into the Middara Adventure Book, Untitled Chapter, Act 1. The first page is the introduction. It kind of goes over the general layout. It mentions, using the book. Some stuff can be hidden text. As you can see here, there's this red stuff. If you put the red revealer over, you can actually see it, which I didn't even know Tabletop Simulator can do something like this. This is really cool. I like that. And then, of course, it's just like, hey, this is how you use the book. It's the top bar is color-coded based off introduction, story scene, ending scenes, encounters, and side quest. There's some diagrams, which are just kind of very similar to the diagram book, where you need to set up encounters. It mentions what you need to do for saving games. This is based off kind of the physical copy, so I wouldn't worry too much about it. It does let you know at the very end that, hey, you need to use these 4 characters because they are what start the story. So we have to start with Nightingale, Zeke, Remy, and Rook. So anything else? It's just talking about rewards and stuff, nothing too fancy. And here we are, Chapter 1. You can see there's unpleasantness. The art style in this game is rather unique. I personally don't have any issues with it. I mean, some of the dresses and stuff can be a bit revealing and stuff like that. The setting of Madera is essentially Madera is a fantasy world that is connected to modern day Earth, and any humans that go across the portals that connect to Madera go through a transformation process that changes them in a unique way. So, for example, Rook became a big, muscly guy. Nightingale got horns and a tail. Zeke, I believe, has pointed ears, but other than that, he didn't really change that much, as you can probably tell. And then, of course, Remy here grew feathered wings and has pointed ears. There's a bunch of details about the process of, how Madarans get people to their world and things like that. It's essentially their only way to repopulate their people, because when you go through your transformation and you are in Middara, you do not age. So essentially reproduction kind of becomes impossible because, of course, the baby would never age. So what they end up doing is they will go back to Earth and have an offspring there, and then once they hit a certain age dictated by the parents, they'll be guided to the portal and taken through, and then they go through an education process of learning about Middara, because obviously it's a fantasy world that's completely different, doesn't really have ready access to technology, has more magic and things like that. And so they go through essentially an education process. It's about 2 years, or at least it's 2 years in Alenia, which is the kingdom that you're in at this time. At the end of your training and education, you go through a test called the Mast, and that is what we're doing right now. If you complete the Mast, you essentially become Midaran citizens and can go kind of live your life. The only things I'll go ahead and point out real quick: Remy is supposedly the daughter of a mafioso, a mafia boss. Zeke Zhang is part of the Zhang family, which is I believe the second strongest family in Alenia. He is I believe he's I guess a prince or something like that. He is the youngest in line, though, so he's kind of at the bottom. But he's classified as nobility. Nightingale Arson is part of the Arson family, which is the strongest family in Elenia, as far as I know. She is second in line she is a princess. She is second in line. I believe her sister, older sister Shayless, I think, is above her. And then we have Rook Lars, who's essentially son of some farmers. He's essentially just a commoner, as far as we know. He is the strongest and smartest student of the class, so he has that going for him. And yeah, so like I said, these people are going to be going through, they just finished their education, and they'll be going through the mast. So, let's dive right in. Alright, like I said, I'm going to be reading through all this. Some people like me reading, some people don't, but we'll just go with what it is. Before the mast, Nightingale crept almost silently through the crowd, eyes fixed on her target. There were at least 100 of her fellow students here, thronging about and chatting excitedly in their teams of 4. Her victim wasn't watching anything but the cigarette in his fingers. He didn't stand a chance. Air rushed around Nightingale. She jumped, latching onto Zeke's back with both arms like a monkey around a tree. Zeke! Her voice came out somewhere between a squeal and a screech, loud enough that a few nearby students turned to stare. Her friend grunted and spluttered, the cigarette tumbling away from his mouth. You trying to kill me? Nightingale dropped to the ground behind him. You don't need me for that. She extinguished the still smoldering cigarette with a well-placed step. You've been here as long as I have, 2 years away from Earth, and you're still poisoning yourself. Zeke only grinned in response. It also makes you smell terrible, someone said from behind them. They both turned, and Nightingale's eyes widened as she saw her sister Shayless standing there. Nightingale was usually thrilled to see her, but today was different. Today, Shayless was one of the proctors on the most important test of their new lives, the Magical Aptitude and Skill Test, or the MAST for short. Makes me smell terrible, Zeke scoffed. See, here I was expecting something like, it's good to see you, Zeke, or maybe, how'd you do on your written exams? You know, friend stuff. No favoritism today, Shayla said. She sounded stern, but she was grinning at them as she flipped through a few pages on a worn clipboard. Oh, but look at that. Lucky you. Looks like you two ended up together. What a coincidence, Nightingale muttered, rolling her eyes, and they put the royal heirs together. Consider that the only luck you get today, Shayla said. Nightingale looked around, wondering who their other partners would be. Of course, she and Zeke would be in a group together. She knew why Shayla didn't want to broadcast it, though. Other students would be quick to pick up on any nepotism. While Nightingale knew each one of the students around them, the really short girl with multicolored eyes, the kid with the strange goat-like hooves instead of feet, none of them were actually friends. Each team has 4 people, Zeke said. Who are the other 2? Rook, Lars, and Remy Moretti. Shayla frowned at the clipboard for a moment, then shrugged and tucked it away under one arm. You need me to point them out? Nah, we're good. Zeke rested one hand briefly on Nightingale's shoulder, pointing towards the largest student in the room. I see Rook there. If you're not already, get acquainted. I've only got another few teams to assign before I explain everything. Shayla walked away, vanishing effortlessly into the crowd. Guess it makes sense. Rook's got to be the smartest student here, Zeke said. They started walking towards them, Nightingale leaving it to Zeke to clear a path for them. Nightingale lowered her voice so the other students nearby couldn't hear. Sure, Rook makes sense. Remy, though? Isn't her dad some kind of mafioso? He thought it was a good idea to pair someone like that with royalty. Couldn't make it look like favoritism, so they give us a boat anchor to balance out our awesomeness, Zeke shrugged. Every team has 4, so long as she doesn't slow us down, we'll be fine. Rook was easily double the size of Nightingale, with hands like hammers and a beard like a lion. Hey, Zeke, Rook called. They met with a bone-cracking embrace. Remy stood just behind him, arms folded awkwardly in front of her. She looked up, smiling politely, and extended a hand. Hey, I guess we're together for the test, Princess Nightingale Arson, ma'am. Remy peered at Nightingale through impressive multicolored dreadlocks, her massive owl-like wings folded behind her, making Remy's small frame look a little bigger. Just Nightingale, she corrected, offering the hand. You're Remy, right? Yeah. Remy looked past her up to the gigantic Rook, who was still talking with Zeke. I know I'm probably not the teammate you were hoping for. Nightingale blushed, unable to meet her eyes. She didn't get a chance to respond, because at the moment her sister stepped up onto a raised platform at the edge of the hall and started shouting. Alright, listen up everyone. Welcome to the Magical Aptitude and Skill Test. If any of you have doubts about your ability to complete the MAST, then door's right there. You'll be required to go through the Archivist, the Academy's training dungeon. Don't think the Bellicose cubes make up for stupid mistakes, because they don't. Students here died during this test. There are a few seconds of silence. We're going to walk you through the doors behind me to the armory. Each of you is entitled to 1 pack of supplies. Choose wisely. If you get halfway through the test before you realize you didn't bring something important, too bad. She paused, waiting for her statement to sink in. If you have any last questions, ask either me or another proctor before you get into the dungeon. Once the test starts, you'll only get my help if things go very wrong. She raised her voice, glancing once around the room. For the sake of your grades, you do not want our help. There were no questions. Shayla's turned, hopping off the edge of the platform. Follow me to the armory. Choose a starting pack, depending on the adventure. Nightingale starts with Gore Shot Discipline. Mundane weapons in the following mundane items: a longsword, magic talisman, defensive core, occult t-shirt, an MF Fortitude, and a vitality juice box. I do like the fact that they have like health potions in like juice boxes rather than glass vials. Zeke has the martial discipline Blade Works. Has the following mundane items: 2 short swords, a utility core, a badass leather jacket, 2 throwing knives, and a vitality juice box. Remy has the martial discipline Hammer Helm, has a war axe, ability core, occult t-shirt, 2 throwing axes, and a vitality juice box. And then Rook starts with the Sanctus discipline Mend, has 2 war hammers, a deflection core, a curse, a hyper energy HP potion, and a magic bomb. After equipping your chosen character, continue reading. By default, we already have everyone equipped. I'll go more into the specific stuff about the characters later on. I will point out, once you get done with the mask, you will be given an opportunity to kind of change up your gear as well as your disciplines. So don't feel too bad if you're locked in. You feel like you're being locked in right now. Essentially, they kind of ensure that you have at least 1 healer, 1 spellcaster, and at least some damage dealers. All right. The armory was well stocked, and none of them would go into the dungeon wanting. After selecting their gear, they made their way to an old freight lift operated with pulleys and ropes. There was only enough room on the lift for the 4 of them, and no pesky safety features like rails. A burly proctor Nightingale recognizes an archery instructor stood just beside the lift. Someone keep a hand on the rope at all times, he warned. If you let go, the fall will kill you. Got it, Rook answered. He was the first to climb aboard, taking hold of the control rope with 1 gigantic fist. The rest of them followed him aboard, and they started down. This is going to be awesome. Nightingale looked down at the firefly lights of the glowstone illuminating the carved stone patterns of the dungeon below. Even if it's a trial dungeon, it's about time we get out of the classroom. Zeke nodded. I just can't wait to graduate. No more lectures, no more exams. Remy shuffled near the edge of the lift, her wings twitching a little in the slight breeze. Yeah. Shayla was waiting at the bottom of the lift in a cavernous room cut from rough stone. Several passages opened away in all directions. Down some of the tunnels, lights were trailing away, and voices were echoing as groups set out on their separate paths. You ready, Littlesses? Shayla gestured down a dark hallway. That one's yours. I'm ready. Nightingale drew her weapon and raised it enthusiastically. Nothing down there stands a chance. I'm sure it doesn't. Shayla reached out, wrapping one arm around Nightingale in a quick hug. Shayla turned, meeting each of their eyes slowly. Take care of each other. Your team shares 1 grade, so your citizenship depends on it. With a nod, she tugged on the rope, and at once the rickety elevator started to rise. Good luck. Zeke waved at her as she disappeared. He turned and headed towards the indicated pathway. His expression wilted as he got his first look at what waited for them. Damp stone, thick cobwebs, and the smell of decay. Let's get this over with. They left the first room behind, the sound of squeaking metal pulleys fading into the distance. The stone was thick here, too thick to hear what any of the other groups may be doing. Soon enough, they were left with nothing but their own footsteps and the light of their glowstones. They didn't have far to go before they reached the first of the Bellicose cubes. It was a small relic, only about a foot across, and set into the stone wall of the cavern. Intricate carvings of Kruor magic pulsed with red light as they neared the basin at the front. I always hate using these things, though I guess they've kept me safe in a couple of sparring matches, Remy muttered. It's better than getting killed, Rook stated. The proctors put them here so that they have time to intervene. If we're defeated by monsters, they just make sure to attune yourself with it. Without putting in your blood, it won't protect you. Attuned or not, fighting will still hurt, Zeke added. I broke an arm while learning to use a sword. Guy cheap-shotted me. Rook nodded in agreement. Zeke's right. I've broken another student's arm while learning to use a sword. Nightingale winced as she cut her hand along the blade of her weapon, just deep enough that a few drops of blood welled up in her palm. She held it out over the bowl, watching the drops fall and boil away. For just a moment, she felt as though all the blood in her body was being tugged towards the cube. The sensation passed, and she got out of the way. They all took their turns before they finally advanced into the encroaching gloom. Continue to the Mass Day 1, page 7. Tip. Party composition. By the way, this here is Nyx. She's an instructor, I believe. Tip. Party composition. Ideally, each party contains at least one adventurer who can cast spells to get by highly armored targets. This is generally good advice. Tip. Restoring and ending encounters. When adventurers restore, they unflip and unexhaust all cards and remove all damage and other tokens. If an encounter's end condition continues without telling adventurers to restore, they keep all items, ability tokens, and damage tokens the way they were. However, adventurers will always remove any effect tokens, the square-shaped ones, they have at the end of an encounter. Regardless, all defeated adventurers or adventurers with more damage tokens than half of their max HP remove damage tokens until they have damage tokens equal to half of their max HP. Rounded up, always. So, just pointing out, anytime that it says restore, you pretty much reset everything. If it doesn't say restore, you return things like these things here, like these squares here are effect tokens, like poison and so forth. But things like these heal tokens, if you have them, and it doesn't say restore, you actually get to keep them to the next encounter. Other things that'll reset is anything that's once per encounter. If it says per encounter, those will reset, even if it doesn't say restore. Things that do not reset when it doesn't say restore are things like flip effects. So here it says, flip when making a conviction check to pass a conviction check. So if you flip it, you notice that effect goes away, and all it says is just conviction upgrade. This would not flip back over until it said restore. Also, something to note, loot cards stay out of the deck until it says restore. So as you're going through, you're generally going to try to get as much loot as possible in hopes of getting the fancy drops, but gold is always useful as well. Anyway, so next page is our first encounter. This is the Mass Day 1. It's noted as underground. It shows you the compass direction. It has a little bit of introduction here. The damp, cold air of the cave chills you to the bone. As your eyes adjust to the dark, you see the faint outline of a large rock blocking the path up ahead. It looks as if a strong push could send the boulder careening into the path, into the pits on either side of it. In any case, it looks like the only way forward. Shows you what you need to do. You need to get these specific tiles. Actually, it shows it right here in the tiles. They're labeled. You can see here barely. It says UM11. And then there, it's turned to the side, it says UM1. So it shows you what tiles you need and what orientation and connect it in a certain way. And then it lets you know if you need any additional terrain on top of that. In this case, it's just the obstructing terrain, which is right here. Then it lets you know that there's going to be two totems. There's going to be a blue one and a red one. Now, what totems do in this game is, at any time one of your characters has line of sight with a token, all play immediately stops, and you need to resolve that totem. Usually, it's something like revealing maybe monsters or treasure, or essentially, it's a way of like keeping track of line of sight. Essentially, then you have things like loot tokens. Sometimes they'll specifically say a color, like blue, and sometimes they'll say random, in which case they'll be flipped over. In which case they'll be flipped over as a black side, and you won't know what color it is. And then it'll tell you what color exit. Sometimes there'll be multiple exits, and you get to pick. It also lets you know, here's your end conditions. An adventurer ends their turn on the blue exit is a win condition. Lose condition is all adventurers are defeated. And then we got special encounter rules. Movable rock. An adventurer adjacent to the obstructing terrain token in UM1, which is that one there, may make an encounter action to make a Strength 10 skill check. If they pass, they may move the obstructing terrain token onto an adjacent unoccupied space. If the space the token is moved onto is dangerous terrain, you discard it. So if you push it off the edge here, it just falls. So dangerous terrain are usually just pits, which is what they are here. And then grading. During this encounter of the Mass, you'll be graded on how many rounds it took you to finish the encounter and how many opponents you defeated. Use time tokens to keep track of how many rounds have passed. At the end of the encounter, consult the chart below to determine your score. Keep track of this score using the notes section of the adventure sheet. Your score for each encounter can never fall below 0. So here, the faster you complete it, the more points you get, and then each cave cycle we defeat is 2 points, and then every adventurer defeated is you lose 5 points. So, much like any sort of test, you're going to be graded. Now, I'm going to go ahead and just show off the cool thing here, which is the scripting. Load page. And there you go. It did throw something in the trash, though, so I'm going to go ahead and look what that is. Okay, it accidentally snagged one of the consumables. Anything that's like up here, like on the actual play area, it'll sometimes grab it and yank it off. Luckily, I knew which character it belonged to, so that's all good. But as you can see, it sets up the tiles, it even locks it for you, and then it sets up the totems and all the stuff here. It does show where we start. There are 2 slots here and 2 slots here. We have to set up before we actually get the CR initiative. You do initiative even if there's nothing on the board. And we'll go right there. Actually, I'll put you guys on the bottom. We'll put you there. Put you there. And put you there. Alright. And then one thing we also need to do is get their initiative card set up. So we're going to search for this. Now, something that's a little bit weird is it sometimes does not show the right actual backs for the cards for some reason. And whenever they're in this search thing, I don't know why. But essentially, here's Zeke. There it goes. It got fixed. There's Nightingale. There's Rook. And there's Remy. Alright. And one last thing we'll go ahead and do before we get started. Or, well, I'm going to call it a video after this. But I'm going to hit Reset Initiative. It's going to shuffle it. And there's our turn order. So it's going to go Remy, Rook, Nightingale, and Zeke. This initiative order may change, but we'll see. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and call this a video. I am the Depressed Eater, and this was Madara on Tabletop Simulator. We'll begin the math next time. See ya.